Hi, Professor. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened with my presentation. I tried uploading the video to YouTube and it won't let me. The video is right here right here inside the actual PowerPoint. So what I did is I'll go to slideshow up here at the top, slideshow, and play from the beginning. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Villarreal. This is my presentation for class. This is our final presentation, and it's on the elements of horror in Asian cinema. So here we have the selections that I chose. I chose to focus on the horror genre, even though we had some really intriguing genres from all the countries that were represented in this class. Uh, we had the food, romance genres. However, my personal favorite has always been horror. That's just what I gravitate to, and I loved the horror selections in this class. Uh, Two of them I'd seen before. I'd seen Dark Water and I'd seen Trade of Busan, but I've never seen The Untold Story, and that one just blew my mind. So that is why I chose to focus the presentation on these specific films and to talk about the elements of horror within this. So for this slide, I'm going to break down what the horror genres and subgenres are. Uh, that'll help explain why I chose these films and to look and get a deeper sense of why they're considered horror. So, starting from the left in the pink, you've got the primary subgenre of gore and disturbing. Those include films that feature torture, such as Hostel, Saw, splatter films, which I don't think too many people in general public have seen, cannibalism, and extreme horror. I do want to make a little side note. It does mention a Serbian film. Please do not ever, ever, ever see a Serbian film. I made the mistake of watching it. It borders on snuff film territory. It is a fictional tale that is extreme. Now, Untold Story, I'm going to argue and demonstrate why it fits into this gore and disturbing category. So for that movie to be on the same level as one as extreme as a Serbian film was quite a shock for me, especially knowing that we went over it in class this semester. Now, next subgenre that's talked about is psychological. Those can be anywhere that involve home invasion, like The Strangers, phobia films. The mentioned Frozen and Buried, but it can be anything from Cell, where Ryan Reynolds is trapped I believe, in a trunk with a cell phone that's going to die. Anything that subverts the psychological aspect of a horror situation. And of course, horror genres, you've got to go with the killer. That's the most prevalent, genre in the last 30 years, maybe 40 years, since I'm older than the majority of students in here. I'm really dating myself now. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. You have all the iconic killers: Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers. Uh, there's one subgenre here that I do think is incredible and does tie into another a film on this list, which is the giallo and crimes genre. For those unfamiliar, giallo is an Italian subgenre. Involves a lot of investigative work, police work, a lot of think of a police procedural trying to find a serial killer. You can see these in the films of Dario Argento, The Man Who Made Suspiria, which is a considered a horror classic. He also made films such as Tenebrae, Deep Red, where those focus on a detective trying to track down a killer. It's very stylistic, very over the top in its violence, and Giallo really kind of inspired some of the more American serial killer films throughout the late 80s and early 90s. In particular, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and even elements of Giallo can be seen in the Morgan Freeman movie Seven. For the next subgenre, we have the classic monster movies. You know, think monster movies, you think the Wolf Man, you think Frankenstein's monster, you think of vampires and werewolves and zombies. We did see a zombie film, and we are going to discuss a zombie film. There's also elements of science fiction with regards to aliens and mythological creatures, kaiju monsters like Godzilla. You know, everybody loves the monster genre. And lastly, paranormal. The paranormal genre has seen a huge resurgence in the last 10 to 20 years, primarily in the films of The Conjuring, Insidious here in America, but really got a jump start because of the Japanese horror movies that were coming over. You know, Ringu, Ju-on, all these, Dark Water, I'm sorry, all these international and foreign films that have taken the elements of paranormal movies from previous generations. You know, the Hammer haunted horror movies, the original House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price, the original Haunting. They've taken those tropes and those elements and have included their own cultural identities into them and really reinvigorated a kind of a stagnant genre. I'm going to explain why Dark Water falls under that paranormal genre. So, for the first film that we discussed, this is the Eight Immortals restaurant, The Untold Story. Now, the country of origin was Hong Kong, and it was directed by Herman Yao. The plot of the movie was police officers investigate a case involving severed limbs discovered on a beach. This discovery and the subsequent investigation leads them to the operator of a restaurant with exquisite pork buns. As the investigation intensifies, the true nature of the killer is revealed, as is the method of his crimes and the secret behind the restaurant's succulent and popular steamed buns. And, as a side note, this was based on an actual murder case from 1988. For American horror fans, this thought of consuming food products made of human flesh is very reminiscent of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a barbecue that was made from the victims. Also, the horror comedy classic Motel Hell. If you have not seen Motel Hell, I highly suggest you watch that. As you can see some of the more outrageous instances of comedy and horror, how they work together, clearly was an inspiration to these filmmakers, because this film did expertly craft some pretty comedic moments to kind of a gory, disturbing film. So the elements of horror in this movie, in the Untold Story, now this one could be classified under the killer and gore and disturbing genres. Now, as a film in the killer genre, this one contains elements of crime and giallo, which I did discuss earlier, due to its focus on an authority figure investigating a gruesome murder or crime. This is seen in the Untold Story as the detectives attempt to track down the killer and deduce his identity. The film also has some slasher elements, in particular the scenes where the killer is mutilating the bodies of his victims. This movie can be categorized as gore or disturbing due to its use of cannibalism or torture. Throughout the film, the police officers and other patrons of the restaurant constantly praise the quality of the steamed buns, completely unaware that they are consuming the flesh of the very people they are searching for. Now, that bit of irony did add to some pretty comedic elements to the movie. I thought it was great. Added a little bit of levity, especially in scenes that had a lot of emotional trauma, traumatic in the sense that the scene where the killer tortures, torments, and kills the original restaurant owner's family is one of the most vicious and emotionally excruciating scenes in modern horror cinema due to the severity of the violence and the psychopathic tendencies of the killer displays to his victims, including children. This scene in particular was the one that really pushed me to the edge of not wanting to complete this film. The only other time I'd ever had that experience was when I saw the one that I mentioned before, a Serbian film. This movie straddled the line. I could see why it was categorized as it was a Category 3 and Category 4 in Hong Kong cinema, just like rated R, hard R, almost X here in America. That was intense. So the comedic elements of the officers praising the taste of the buns and joyfully getting more to take with them really kind of like cleanse the palate of the viewer, especially after having witnessed such a horrific torture scene. If you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about, where the family is bound and gagged and witnessing just the brutality that's being brought upon their family members by the killer. Pretty hardcore stuff there. The next film we're going to talk about is Dark Water. Now, this one was made in 2002 and was originally from Japan. It was directed by Hideo Nakata. And the plot involves, in the final stages of a messy divorce, Yoshimi struggles to build a new life for herself and her daughter. Unfortunately, the challenges of single parenting and an ongoing custody battle are further complicated when they move into an apartment building plagued by mysterious water leaks and haunted by the apparition of a little girl. Now, this one also was influential in that it was part of a group of films that inspired American remakes. There was an influx of Japanese horror remakes coming to America, starting with The Ring, then The Grudge, which was based on a Japanese movie called Ju-on. You had One Missed Call, Pulse, Dark Water. Every American studio gravitated towards these Japanese horror films because they were a shot in the arm to a stagnant genre. Paranormal movies hadn't been very popular in American cinemas just because they've kind of already run their course. The preceding decades in the 80s were dominated by slashers. In the 90s, it was pseudo slashers slash, quote unquote, the pun, slash intellectual movies. Movies that took themselves too seriously, like Scream, and Legend. There was a sense of irony in the fact that they were trying to take themselves too seriously. It just didn't work. But the American remakes of these Japanese films really kickstarted the paranormal genre. And as I said earlier, it can be seen in the franchises that have prospered since these films hit the market. Modern genres. Modern franchises such as The Conjuring, Insidious, Paranormal Activity, all have their origins in these Japanese horror movies. So the elements of horror in Dark Water is that it falls under the paranormal genre. It has elements of the haunted house and ghosts and spirits subgenres due to being set in a creepy apartment complex and a haunted apartment. It also features a restless spirit of a young child, which was a common trope of Japanese movies at the times, like I mentioned with Ringu and Ju-on. These films also inspired American remakes. The paranormal elements work well within the film due to the Japanese cultural aspects, especially the male-dominated society at the time of filming. This cultural element created more conflict and confusion for the protagonist. This helped bolster her encounters with the entity and gives more context into the struggle that the protagonist endures as she experiences the haunting. Now, the final film that we're going to discuss is Train to Busan. It's originally a Korean film and was directed by Sang Ho-yeon. The plot is Train to Busan is a harrowing zombie horror thriller that follows a group of terrified passengers fighting their way through a countrywide viral outbreak while trapped on a suspicion-filled, blood-drenched bullet train ride to Busan, a southern resort city that has managed to hold off the zombie hordes, or so everybody hopes. Now, this one also helped spearhead the Korean zombie renaissance with similar projects such as Peninsula, which was a pseudo-sequel to Train to Busan. There's also, I believe, a prequel called Soul Station, although I haven't seen those two yet. There's also another movie called The Wailing and the Netflix television show The Kingdom, all based on all Korean movies featuring zombie. zombie characters. Now, the elements of horror in Train to Busan is that it falls under the monster category with an emphasis on the undead and virus subgenres. Now, though the film relies on a familiar zombie movie trope regarding the zombies' origins, stemming from a viral experiment gone awry, this film uses the zombie outbreak as a commentary on familial relations and the socioeconomic and class issues that are prevalent in contemporary Korean culture. Now, that can be seen in the scenes where uh, main character, after having escaped the zombie horde, has to fight his way through the train to get his daughter, which is on another car, and then fight his way back to the safe, this quote unquote safe location, only to be met by paranoia and jeers from the other passengers who have been manipulated and gaslighted by a more successful, prominent businessman. He's able to use his influence to coerce the other passengers into not trusting one another. That right there's just a little slight aside to the cultural aspect of this movie. Now, one thing that I did find outstanding was the zombies movies were performed by trained gymnasts and athletes, and the film utilized practical makeup and special effects, which added to the authentic tone and aesthetic of the film. That right there was a selling point for me. I've become a huge filmmaking techniques of similar movies, and it's kind of inspired me to want to go out and make my own zombie film too. Ladies and gentlemen, and my fellow students, professors, I want to thank you for your time, giving me your attention during this presentation. Here on this final slide, we have the sources that I used. I primarily used IMDb for the plot synopsis, for the uh, filmography notes, and then also at the bottom, the website Horror Film Wiki, which is where I found the initial chart that broke down the subgenres. So again, I want to say thank you for your time and your patience. Hope everybody has a great summer. Godspeed. That was the conclusion of my presentation. So I hope this is able to suffice, because really there's no other option. Thank you.